All right, it's Brandon Vogt, and this is our Farm to Table report presented by DSR Cattle. You can check out dsrcattle.com for more information, and Matt Zorn is joining us. And Matt, this week we're going to talk about the food pyramid and whether or not it's still valid today, or was it a scam? What were you able to find out, Matt?
You know, Brandon, it's very interesting, this debate that goes on. And basically, before the food pyramid was introduced in the U.S., the USDA would release food guidelines for the public and for dietary recommendations. Yeah. Now, a woman named Louise Light was the USDA Director of Dietary Guidance in the 1980s, and she was responsible for the team that provided the first recommendations for the food pyramid. Now, she would go on to write a proposal that included 5 to 9 servings of fresh fruits and veggies a day. It encouraged things like meat and eggs, and suggested the use of cold-pressed fats and olive oils, while limiting sugar, refined grains, and processed breads to a minimum. Now, at the time, these are all considered very reasonable ideas. But when her team submitted these ideas to the USDA, it was rejected. And instead, the USDA released a modified version that said instead of 2 to 3 servings a day of grain, it should be 6 to 11. Now, Light felt that these changes would have consequences on the health of the public. But what she said was that the food pyramid had been sold to the highest bidder, and that bidder was the grain industry. Yeah. Now, why would she say something like that? Well, it turns out in the early 70s, many countries around the globe were having a wheat shortage. And in July of 1972, the former Soviet Union negotiated to buy 10 million tons of wheat from the U.S. to avert starvation and social unrest inside their country. Now, because of the shortages and the high prices, the U.S. was happy to make the sale. Now, this sale got the attention of the U.S. Agricultural Secretary under President Nixon at the time, a gentleman named Earl Butz. Now, Butz saw an opportunity for Nixon's reelection by getting farmers' support. So the USDA rolled back the regulations on the amount wheat farmers could grow. Some said that he was just bribing the farmers to get support for Nixon's reelection. Now, after the election, the farmers continued growing at the higher rates. The shortages were gone, and we had more grain than we needed, or, be honest, really knew what to do with. So they needed a way to get the U.S. to eat more grains. Now, to do that, they had to move people from a diet of proteins like meat and eggs to a diet of breads, pastas, and cereals. Now, how would they do something like that? Well, at the time, the American Heart Association declared that saturated fats increased blood cholesterol, blocking coronary arteries and causing heart attacks. Now, they came to this conclusion based on the hypothesis by a gentleman named Ansel Keys. He was a physiologist from Cambridge University. Now, Keys had something called the diet-heart hypothesis, and this put the blame of coronary disease from saturated fats derived from meat. Now, many at the time argued that the method behind his hypothesis was seriously flawed. And despite multiple studies showing that carbohydrates were the problem and not saturated fats, the American Heart Association made it its official policy, and by 1977, Americans were being urged to adhere to a diet of low fat. Now, the meat industry complained, the medical industry complained. They said there was no evidence behind the claims. But now meats, which we have been eating for thousands of years, suddenly were bad for us. Yeah. So even though the first official food pyramid was not released until 1992 in the U.S., the food guidelines released by the USDA in the 80s were already relaying this information to the public. Now, institutionalized food services like schools, hospitals, prisons, they all rolled it out. And now meats, fruits, and vegetables only made up a tiny portion of the recommended diet, while carbohydrates made up more than half of our daily calories, and most of it came from grains. Well, what were the results? Obesity skyrocketed in the U.S. It went from 14% in 1975 to 42% in 2020. That's a 300% increase.
Wow. That's
so
incredible.
The food, it's insane. Now, the food pyramid was supposed to be healthier, but the public was getting fatter and people noticed. So back to the original question, was the food pyramid valid? And I think if you look at the information, it wasn't. It was never valid. Was it a scam from the beginning? I'll let listeners decide for themselves. But I think we can see why Louise Light said the food pyramid was sold to the grain industry.
Yeah, all politics is what it seems like to me. All right, Matt.
Go ahead.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about DSR Cattle, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So at Desert Sky Ranch, we grow Angus cattle to order right here in New Mexico for people who want to fill their freezers with healthy beef. And if listeners want better quality at a better price, we invite them to see how our program works at dsrcattle.com or call us at 505-864-3900.
All right. Matt Zorn, DSR Cattle, here on 96.3 News Radio, KKOB.